On the measure of which party is listening and focusing on the right issues, Labor has dropped from 41% in January to 28% now. And that's reflected in the latest poll on The Voice. But then we had this pathetic, weak and evasive announcement that there'll be an inquiry into Australia's response to the pandemic, to coronavirus. Well, of course, there won't be. This is just rhetoric. Paul Kelly's been around a long time, writing in Canberra. He called it a stitch-up, which is exactly what it is. This is politics rotten to the core. As you know, every day we were lectured by state premiers. It was fear-mongering at its worst. Yet we had unfair and unjustified dictatorial behaviour by state governments, lockdowns, closed schools, shut the borders, you can't do business, you can't attend the funeral of a relative, you can't leave your home. And in New South Wales, people woke to see uniformed men brandishing guns, presumably to deal with all these branded criminals that didn't yield to the dictates of the state. They were actually sitting on park benches. State governments, eh? Well, the state governments are immune from this inquiry. This was tyranny and government dictatorship at its worst by state governments. They were dogmatically wrong, yet those same state governments are now exempt from Albanese's inquiry. Here we go again. Attacked the Morrison government. And fair enough, they got plenty wrong. But if the pandemic is, as the Prime Minister said, the most significant global crisis that we've faced in decades, then the response by governments of all stripes should be under the microscope, with an inquiry with the powers of a royal commission. This inquiry has no teeth. It's an inquiry when you don't have an inquiry. The IR legislation looks after Labor's mates. Here, the Albanese government is looking after its state brothers and sisters. What should a fully empowered inquiry address? Well, I've told you many times, but Adam Crichton, writing from America, hit the nail on the head. A really smart young man, this fellow, and he should be the subject of an inquiry, and these things I'm saying should be the subject of an inquiry, and they won't be. Adam wrote, COVID-19 didn't print trillions of dollars, euros and pounds, which have prompted rampant inflation, years of declining living standards, high interest rates, and a massive surge in inequality. He wrote, the virus didn't close schools and universities, ruin small businesses, delay medical treatments, isolate people from their loved ones. It didn't force millions of people to take a rushed vaccine against their will or censor doctors and medical professions who turned out to be right. He writes, Adam Crichton, these were all political decisions. And he says, until our political leaders are able to speak honestly about the role of government in the hardship and suffering of the past few years, any sort of inquiry will be a waste of time, whatever the terms of reference happen to be, unquote. Well, this so-called inquiry into the response to the pandemic is a stain on the Albanese government. We were lectured daily by dumb premiers and even dumber chief medical officers whose utterances have been proven to be not just wrong, but socially, personally and economically disastrous and damaging. Australians were lectured every day by Daniel Andrews, Gladys Berejiklian, Kerry Chant, Jeanette Young in Queensland, who was then made governor by the Palaszczuk government, Brett Sutton in Victoria, who's resigned. These people carried on like Hitler's. The suffering was profound. Thousands of people died who should not have died. Yes, the Morrison government should be investigated, but so too should the state governments, and they won't be. We were just dictated to, and not one piece of paper was ever presented to justify what we were ordered to do. I asked premiers to produce the paper. I was cancelled. Cancelled. There was no risk analysis of what vaccination and boosters might do to some people. The more I talk about this, as you can gather from my voice, the angrier I get. This Albanese government inquiry into Australia's response to coronavirus is but the latest Albanese government disgrace. And add this to the divisive voice, the reckless and destructive energy policy, the calamitous industrial relations changes, and the appalling endorsement of Qantas behaviour. And now you've got this, a litany of failure. This is not an inquiry, nor, I might add, are the three people conducting it entirely independent. Only one has direct, applicable health expertise, another has health administration experience, and the other is an economist from a left-of-centre think tank. They'll inquire into the Morrison government's response to the coronavirus. The premiers and state governments are exempt. They're Labor mates of Anthony Albanese. Other countries have had inquiries, including New Zealand, with the status of a royal commission. The UK has an inquiry appointed under its Inquiries Act. This here is a Commonwealth-only inquiry. The states, immune. Indeed, in the announcement, it was made clear that, quote, outside the scope of the inquiry are, quote, actions taken unilaterally by the state and territory governments, unquote. Outside the scope of the inquiry. There you are. Inquiry's meaningless. Another failure. Sweden had an 8-person commission chaired by a justice of the Supreme Court. For us, under this government, we won't have a scarifying analysis of how governments responded to coronavirus. Most of what they did was flawed, and they never provided one sentence of justification for what they were doing. We weren't in it together then, and now with this fake inquiry, we're not in it together again.